The bright morning sun streamed through the airport windows as travelers rushed to their gates, dragging luggage and clutching coffee cups. Among them walked Anthony, his calm presence a stark contrast to the hurried crowds around him. He moved with purpose, checking his watch, a gift from his late father, as he approached the boarding gate for Flight 2463. He was early as usual. Anthony believed that being on time meant being 15 minutes ahead of schedule, a habit that had served him well throughout his career. "Good morning," he greeted the gate agent with a warm smile. "How are you today?" The agent looked up from her computer, her tired expression softening. "I'm well, thank you for asking. Not many people do." She checked his boarding pass and ID, her eyes widening slightly but professionally hiding her recognition. "You're all set, Mr. Reynolds. Have a pleasant flight." Anthony nodded his thanks and proceeded down the jet bridge. He was dressed comfortably for the 4-hour flight, dark jeans, a navy button-down with sleeves rolled to his forearms, and a quality watch that gleamed against his dark skin. His jacket was draped over his arm, his leather messenger bag slung across his body. As one of the first passengers to board, Anthony made his way through the empty plane to his first-class seat, 3A, a window seat. He stowed his bag in the overhead compartment, keeping only his tablet and a small notebook. Settling into the spacious seat, he immediately took out his tablet and opened several documents he needed to review before landing. The cabin crew moved efficiently around the cabin, preparing for departure. A flight attendant approached with a tray of drinks. "Welcome aboard, sir. Would you like a pre-departure beverage? Water, juice, or champagne?" "Water would be perfect, thank you," Anthony replied, glancing up briefly from his work with an appreciative smile. As the cabin began to fill with more first-class passengers, mostly business travelers in suits, tapping away on phones or laptops, Anthony remained focused on his work. The airline was considering new sustainability initiatives that could potentially save millions in fuel costs while reducing their carbon footprint, and he wanted to understand all the details before the meeting later that day. The seat next to him remained empty until final boarding announcements were made. Just as the gate was about to close, a flurry of activity at the front of the cabin caught his attention. A woman with highlighted blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun was being escorted to the remaining first-class seat, 3B, right beside Anthony. "I can't believe this happened again," she complained loudly to the flight attendant. "My assistant always books me the aisle seat. This is completely unacceptable." "I'm very sorry, Ms. Patterson," the flight attendant responded politely. "The flight is completely full today. If you'd like, I can check if anyone would be willing to switch, but we're about to close the doors for departure." The woman, Ms. Patterson apparently, huffed irritably as she approached. When she noticed Anthony, her expression shifted subtly. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned him from head to toe, taking in his casual attire. Anthony noticed her reaction but returned his attention to his tablet, having experienced similar looks countless times before. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tight with forced politeness. "I believe you're in my seat." Anthony looked up calmly. "I'm in 3A. I believe yours is 3B, he replied, gesturing to the seat beside him. Ms. Patterson frowned, checked her boarding pass again, and reluctantly placed her designer handbag in the overhead bin. As she squeezed past to take her seat, she made no effort to avoid brushing against Anthony's knees, despite the ample space she had. Once seated, she immediately pressed the call button. When a different flight attendant approached, Tanya according to her name tag, Ms. Patterson spoke in a stage whisper clearly meant for Anthony to hear. "Excuse me, is first class completely full? I'm wondering if there are any other available seats." Tanya glanced between them, her professional smile never wavering. "I'm afraid we're completely full today in all cabins. Is there a problem with your seat?" No, Ms. Patterson replied, giving a tight smile. "I just prefer different company when I travel first class." Anthony continued reviewing his documents, pretending not to hear, though his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Tanya's eyes flicked toward Anthony for a split second before returning to Ms. Patterson. "I understand having preferences, ma'am, but as I mentioned, we're completely full today. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage instead?" "Fine, champagne," Ms. Patterson replied curtly. As Tanya walked away, Ms. Patterson pulled out her phone, obviously ignoring the illuminated signs requesting that electronic devices be switched to airplane mode. She began typing furiously, occasionally glancing sideways at Anthony with poorly disguised disdain. The plane pushed back from the gate, and the safety demonstration began. Anthony tucked away his tablet, watching attentively as the flight attendants demonstrated the safety features. Ms. Patterson, meanwhile, continued using her phone until a senior flight attendant approached. "Ma'am, we're preparing for takeoff. All electronic devices need to be switched to airplane mode or powered off at this time," he said firmly but politely. Ms. Patterson sighed dramatically but complied, dropping her phone into her purse. She then turned slightly toward the aisle, positioning herself as far from Anthony as the seat would allow. The plane taxied to the runway, and Anthony gazed out the window, watching the ground crew in their bright vests becoming smaller as they pulled away. He took a deep breath, centering himself. He wouldn't let this woman's behavior affect him. He had far too much experience with people like her. As they waited in the takeoff queue, Ms. Patterson cleared her throat loudly. "Excuse me," she called to a passing flight attendant. Not Tanya this time, but an older woman named Helen. "I just want to verify that everyone in this section has the proper tickets. First class is quite expensive, and I'm sure there must be some mistake." Helen's professional smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Everyone in first class has been properly ticketed and verified at the gate, ma'am. Is there something specific I can help you with?" No, Ms. Patterson replied with a thin smile. "Just checking. Sometimes people end up where they don't belong." Anthony continued looking out the window, his reflection in the glass revealing nothing of his thoughts. He'd built his career on staying composed in uncomfortable situations. This was just another Tuesday for him. The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their takeoff and a flight time of 3 hours and 52 minutes to their destination. The engines roared as they accelerated down the runway, and Anthony felt the familiar push back against his seat as the plane lifted into the air. Once they reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dinged off, the first-class cabin service began. Tanya approached their row first. "Would either of you like something to drink?" she asked, addressing them both equally. "I'll have sparkling water, please," Anthony responded with a polite smile. "And I'll have—" Ms. Patterson began, but then stopped and frowned. "Actually, could you serve the other passengers first?" "I need a moment to decide." Tanya's professional demeanor didn't falter. "Of course. I'll bring your sparkling water right away, sir, and come back to you in a moment, ma'am." As Tanya moved to the galley, Ms. Patterson muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Anthony to hear. "Typical. They always serve them first now. It's like they're afraid of being called racist or something." Anthony took a slow, deep breath. He could confront her, but experience had taught him that people like Ms. Patterson rarely change their minds when confronted directly. Besides, he had more important things to focus on today than educating someone determined to remain ignorant. When Tanya returned with his sparkling water, Anthony thanked her warmly. "Perfect timing. I was just getting thirsty." "You're very welcome," Tanya replied with a genuine smile. There was something in her eyes. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "Let me know if you need anything else, sir." As the flight continued, Anthony returned to his work, occasionally making notes in his small leather-bound notebook. Ms. Patterson ordered a mimosa when Tanya returned, making a point to mention that she was a frequent first-class flyer who expected certain standards. The cabin was peaceful otherwise, with most passengers either working or resting. Anthony finished reviewing the sustainability proposal and closed his tablet, leaning his head back against the seat. He had a long day ahead once they landed, and a few moments of rest would do him good. As he closed his eyes, he could feel Ms. Patterson's occasional glances in his direction. He'd faced this kind of scrutiny his entire professional life, people who couldn't see past their own preconceptions, who couldn't believe that he belonged in spaces like first-class cabins and boardrooms. Little did Ms. Patterson know just how much he belonged on this particular airline, but she would find out soon enough. For now, Anthony Reynolds, recently appointed CEO of Skyway Airlines, would enjoy his flight in peaceful silence, saving his energy for the battles worth fighting. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jostling Anthony awake from his light doze. He blinked, orienting himself as the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, we're experiencing some light chop as we pass through a weather system. I've turned on the seatbelt sign as a precaution. Flight attendants, please pause service and take your seats." Anthony secured his seatbelt, which he'd kept loosely fastened while resting. Beside him, Miss Patterson fumbled with hers, having completely removed it earlier. As the plane dipped again, she gasped, her mimosa sloshing dangerously close to the rim of its glass. "Here," Anthony said instinctively, reaching for the drink to steady it. Miss Patterson jerked her hand away as if his touch might burn her. "I've got it," she snapped, placing the glass in her seat's cup holder. A few drops spilled onto her cream-colored blouse and she dabbed at them with a napkin, scowling. The turbulence intensified briefly. A few passengers gasped as the plane dropped suddenly before stabilizing. Anthony remained calm, having flown countless times for business. He'd weathered far worse storms than this. Miss Patterson, however, gripped the armrests tightly, her knuckles whitening. Despite her obvious discomfort, she still managed to shoot Anthony a sideways glance when he pulled out his notebook and began jotting down a few thoughts that had occurred to him during his rest. "What do you do?" she asked abruptly, the question sounding more like an accusation than genuine interest. Anthony looked up, mildly surprised that she'd initiated conversation. "I work in the airline industry," he replied simply, not elaborating further. "Oh," she said, her tone suggesting she didn't believe him. "Baggage handling?" Anthony gave a small, patient smile. "Something like that." Ms. Patterson pursed her lips, clearly dissatisfied with his vague answer. "I'm in luxury real estate," she volunteered, though he hadn't asked. "I sell multi-million-dollar properties to high-net-worth individuals." She emphasized the last words, as if to underscore the difference she perceived between them. "That sounds interesting," Anthony replied politely. "It is," she continued, warming to her subject. "I just closed on a penthouse for a famous athlete last week. $7 million. These people trust me because I understand their lifestyle and expectations." She paused meaningfully. "First-class, five-star hotels, private clubs. I move in those circles naturally." Anthony nodded, returning to his notebook. "Congratulations on your success." His lack of impressed reaction seemed to irritate her. The turbulence had subsided, and the captain switched off the seatbelt sign. Almost immediately, Miss Patterson pressed the call button. Tanya appeared promptly. "How can I help you, ma'am?" "I need another drink. This one's been contaminated." She held up her glass, which still contained most of her mimosa. "And I'd like to speak to the head flight attendant about the seating arrangements in first class." Tanya's professional smile remained fixed. "I'll get you a fresh drink right away. As for seating arrangements, I'd be happy to assist. I'm actually the lead flight attendant on this flight." Ms. Patterson straightened in her seat. "Well then, I want to register a complaint. The quality of first class has severely declined on this airline. I've been flying first class for years and the standards have dropped considerably." She glanced pointedly at Anthony. "It seems anyone can buy a ticket these days, regardless of whether they belong." Anthony continued writing in his notebook, appearing absorbed in his work, though he caught every word. He'd heard variations of this complaint countless times over his 20-year career. The only difference now was his position to do something about it. Tanya's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Ms. Patterson. Skyway Airlines values all our passengers equally regardless of their background. Our only first-class requirement is a valid ticket." "That's precisely the problem," Ms. Patterson hissed. "There should be standards. People who understand proper etiquette, proper dress." She trailed off, her meaning unmistakable. Anthony closed his notebook and tucked it into his pocket. "Excuse me," he said calmly to both women. "I need to use the restroom." As he stood, Ms. Patterson leaned back dramatically to let him pass, as if trying to avoid contact. Anthony made his way to the first-class lavatory, shaking his head slightly once he was out of sight. He wasn't surprised by her behavior, just disappointed. Even in 2025, some things hadn't changed. In the small lavatory, he splashed cool water on his face and looked at his reflection. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "You'll meet people who can't see past their own prejudices. Their limitations are not yours to carry." When he returned to his seat, Ms. Patterson was typing furiously on her phone, having ignored the electronic device restrictions again. She barely acknowledged his return, shifting minimally to let him pass. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the intercom. "We're beginning our initial descent. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." As the plane began its descent, Anthony noticed a middle-aged man in seat 2C across the aisle glancing at him occasionally, with a puzzled expression. as if trying to place his face. Anthony gave him a polite nod, but returned to his tablet to review his schedule for after landing. Ms. Patterson, meanwhile, had become increasingly agitated. She pressed the call button again, and this time a different flight attendant responded. Ryan, a tall man with a neat beard. "Yes, ma'am? How can I help you?" "I need to speak to whoever's in charge of passenger relations," she demanded. "This flight has been completely unsatisfactory." Ryan maintained his professional demeanor. "I'm sorry to hear that. Would you like to fill out a customer feedback form? We take all passenger concerns seriously." "A form?" Ms. Patterson scoffed. "No, I want to speak to a manager when we land. Someone needs to hear about the declining standards on this airline." "Of course, ma'am. I'll make a note for the ground staff to assist you upon arrival." As Ryan walked away, Ms. Patterson turned toward Anthony, who was still focused on his tablet. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This airline used to be exclusive. Now they'll let anyone on board if they can scrape together the fare." A few uncomfortable glances were exchanged among other first-class passengers. The man in 2C frowned, looking between Anthony and Ms. Patterson with growing concern. Anthony finally set his tablet down and turned to face her directly. His expression was calm but firm. "Ma'am, I've been patient with your comments for the entire flight, but I think it's time we address what's really bothering you." Ms. Patterson blinked, momentarily taken aback by his direct approach. "I don't know what you're implying." "I think you do," Anthony replied quietly. "Your issue isn't with the airline standards. It's with who you believe belongs in this seat." That's ridiculous," she sputtered. "I simply expect a certain level of professionalism and class when I pay for first class. And you've decided, based solely on appearance, that I don't meet those standards." Ms. Patterson's face flushed. "You're twisting my words. I never mentioned race." "You didn't have to," Anthony said, his voice still measured but firm. "Your meaning was clear from the moment you boarded." Their conversation was interrupted as Tanya approached with a phone in hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Reynolds. There's an urgent call from headquarters regarding today's meeting." Ms. Patterson's eyebrows shot up at the formal address. Anthony nodded to Tanya. "Thank you. I'll take it." As Anthony took the phone, Ms. Patterson watched with growing confusion. He spoke briefly, using terms that clearly indicated senior management status. "Yes, tell the board I'll be there directly from the airport. Joe, the sustainability initiative is still our top priority. Have Richard bring the quarterly projections." When he handed the phone back to Tanya, Ms. Patterson was staring at him, reassessing. "You work at Skyway Corporate?" she asked, her tone suddenly much more pleasant. Anthony gave her a measured look. "You could say that." The plane descended through the clouds, the city below coming into view. The captain announced their final approach, and the cabin crew moved efficiently through final checks. "Excuse me," called the man from seat 2C, looking directly at Anthony. "I just realized who you are. Aren't you Anthony Reynolds? I saw your picture in last month's Business Weekly." Before Anthony could respond, Ryan, the flight attendant, passed by and smiled. "Yes, sir, that's our new CEO. We're honored to have him on board today." A hush fell over the first-class cabin. Several passengers turned to look at Anthony with newfound interest and respect. Ms. Patterson's mouth dropped open, her face draining of color as the implications of her behavior throughout the flight dawned on her. Anthony nodded politely to the man in 2C, but said nothing more as the plane touched down with a gentle bump. The passengers broke into the customary applause for a smooth landing. Miss Patterson sat frozen beside him, her earlier confidence evaporated. As the plane taxied to the gate, she cleared her throat several times, clearly struggling to find words. "Mr. Reynolds," she finally managed, her voice now honeyed and apologetic. "I had no idea. I'm so embarrassed about our misunderstanding." Anthony turned to her, his expression neither angry nor gloating, but thoughtful. "That's the problem, isn't it, Miss Patterson? You had no idea who I was, so you felt comfortable making assumptions based solely on what you saw." The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began standing to retrieve their belongings. Miss Patterson remained seated, her face flushed with embarrassment. "The real question," Anthony continued quietly as he stood to get his bag, "is how many other people you've misjudged that way. Something to think about on your next flight." The plane docked at the gate with a gentle bump. As the seatbelt sign switched off, most passengers stood up immediately, eager to stretch their legs after the 4-hour flight. Anthony remained seated, allowing others to gather their belongings first. He was in no rush, a car would be waiting for him. Ms. Patterson, however, seemed frozen in her seat. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by visible discomfort. She fumbled with her phone, pretending to be absorbed in something important while stealing glances at Anthony. "Mr. Reynolds," she finally said, her voice artificially bright. "I want to sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. I certainly didn't mean to imply anything about, well, you know." Anthony turned to face her, his expression neutral. "What exactly didn't you mean to imply, Ms. Patterson?" She shifted uncomfortably. I just have certain expectations for first class. It wasn't personal." "It felt very personal," Anthony replied calmly, "especially the comments about who belongs here and who doesn't." Ms. Patterson's face flushed. "I was simply tired from a stressful week. I didn't mean anything by it." Before Anthony could respond, the man from seat 2C approached, hand extended. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Thomas Wilson from Capital Investments. We've never met, but I've followed your career closely. Your transition from operations to CEO was well-deserved." Anthony stood and shook his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Always good to meet our investors." "Your sustainability initiative is exactly what the industry needs," Wilson continued enthusiastically. "Bold but practical. My team is very impressed with the direction you're taking Skyway. I appreciate that. We're presenting the full plan to the board this afternoon, in fact." As they spoke, Ms. Patterson watched with growing dismay, realizing just how badly she had misjudged the situation. She busied herself gathering her belongings, clearly eager to disappear. Tanya appeared at Anthony's side. "Mr. Reynolds, your car is waiting at the curb. Would you like an escort to bypass the terminal crowds?" "That's not necessary, Tanya, but thank you. I'd like to walk through our terminal. It's been a few weeks since I've seen the new customer service improvements in person." "Of course, sir. We'll have your luggage brought directly to your car." Ms. Patterson, listening to this exchange, looked increasingly mortified. As the aisle cleared, she stood to retrieve her bag from the overhead bin. Anthony stepped back politely to give her space. "Ms. Patterson," he said quietly as she struggled with her heavy designer bag, "allow me to help you with that." Before she could protest, he easily lifted her bag down and set it gently on the empty seat. The simple act of courtesy seemed to make her even more uncomfortable. "Thank you," she mumbled, unable to meet his eyes. As they exited the plane, the entire flight crew had lined up to say goodbye to passengers. When Anthony approached, their professional smiles widened into genuine ones. "Thank you for flying with us today." "Mr. Reynolds," the captain said, shaking his hand warmly. "The pleasure was mine, Captain Brooks. Smooth flying as always." Ms. Patterson trailed behind Anthony, witnessing each crew member's respectful greeting. Several other passengers overheard the exchanges, looking between Anthony and Ms. Patterson with curious expressions, some having noticed her earlier behavior. As they entered the jet bridge, Ms. Patterson quickened her pace to walk alongside Anthony. "Mr. Reynolds," she said in a hushed voice, "I hope you won't take our interaction the wrong way. I would hate for a simple misunderstanding to reflect poorly on me." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "Are you concerned about your reputation or about your behavior?" She blinked rapidly. Well, both, I suppose. I'm not normally like that. It's been a difficult week and Ms. Patterson," Anthony interrupted gently. "We all have difficult weeks. But most people don't respond by trying to make others feel unwelcome or beneath them." They emerged into the terminal, where the bright lights and bustling activity created a stark contrast to the dim, quiet cabin they just left. A young woman in a Skyway Airlines blazer stood waiting with a tablet in hand. "Good afternoon, Mr. Reynolds," she greeted him professionally. "I'm Lisa from Executive Services. Your car is ready whenever you are, but I understand you wanted to walk through the terminal first?" "That's right, Lisa, thank you." Ms. Patterson hovered awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to continue the conversation or make a quick escape. Her indecision was resolved when another Skyway employee approached, a middle-aged man in a crisp uniform with a manager's badge. "Mr. Reynolds, welcome back," he said warmly. "The new customer service kiosks you approved have reduced wait times by 30% already." "Glad to hear it. Greg, let's take a look." As Anthony prepared to leave with his colleagues, Ms. Patterson stepped forward impulsively. "Mr. Reynolds, is there any way we could continue our conversation? Perhaps over coffee? I feel terrible about what happened." Anthony studied her for a moment. There was genuine anxiety in her expression, but whether it stemmed from remorse or concern for her own interests remained unclear. "I'm afraid I have a board meeting to prepare for," he replied. "But if you're truly interested in continuing our conversation, you can contact my office." He nodded to Lisa, who handed Ms. Patterson a business card. Ms. Patterson took the card, her hand trembling slightly. "Thank you. I really am sorry. I don't want you to think I'm, a racist?" Anthony supplied the word she seemed unable to say. Her face crumpled. "I'm not. I have colleagues who are. I never." Anthony's expression softened slightly, not with forgiveness but with something more complex, a weariness tinged with compassion. "Ms. Patterson, I've been flying first class for over 15 years. I've sat in boardrooms with the world's top executives, and in all that time, I've encountered countless people who treated me exactly as you did today, until they learned my title." She stared at him, speechless. "The problem isn't just what you said to me," he continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "It's what you might have said to the flight attendant who was serving you, or the janitor cleaning the terminal, or anyone else you've decided doesn't belong in your space." Around them, the terminal hummed with activity. Travelers rushed to gates, families reunited with hugs, and airport staff directed the controlled chaos with practiced efficiency. For a moment, Ms. Patterson seemed to see it all differently, the diversity of humanity flowing around them, each person with their own story, their own dignity. "I didn't," she began but trailed off, unable to complete her thought. "I need to go," Anthony said, checking his watch. "But I hope our encounter today gives you something to think about." As he turned to leave with his colleagues, Ms. Patterson called after him, "Will you report this to customer relations?" The fear in her voice was unmistakable. Anthony paused. "That depends. On what?" "On whether you learn from it." With that, he continued walking, leaving Ms. Patterson standing alone with her luggage and her thoughts. Greg, the manager who had greeted Anthony earlier, led him toward the main concourse. "Is everything all right, sir?" That passenger seemed upset. "Just a learning opportunity, Greg," Anthony replied. "For both of us." As they walked through the terminal, several employees nodded respectfully as they passed. A few travelers did double takes, recognizing the CEO from recent news coverage of Skyway's expansion plans. They arrived at the new customer service area, where sleek kiosks with Skyway's blue and silver logo stood alongside traditional service counters. Passengers moved through efficiently, with significantly shorter lines than Anthony remembered from his last visit. "The new system is working well," Greg explained proudly. "The AI assistance handles routine questions, freeing our staff to help with more complex issues." Anthony nodded approvingly, watching a young family being helped by a smiling service representative. "And how's staff morale with the new system?" "Much improved. The reduced stress makes for better customer interactions." As they continued their tour, Anthony noticed a familiar figure at one of the kiosks, Ms. Patterson, struggling with the touchscreen interface. Her frustration was evident as she repeatedly jabbed at the screen. Without comment, Anthony veered slightly in her direction, close enough to observe but not to engage. A harried customer service representative approached her. "Ma'am, can I help you with that?" the representative asked, a young woman with a hijab, her name tag reading Amina. Ms. Patterson looked up, irritation clear on her face. But then her gaze drifted past Amina to where Anthony stood observing. Their eyes met briefly. Something shifted in Ms. Patterson's expression. "Yes, please," she said to Amina, her tone noticeably softer than it had been on the plane. "I'm having trouble with the rebooking option." Anthony continued his walkthrough with Greg, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Perhaps there was hope after all. Lisa checked her watch. "Mr. Reynolds, we should head to the car if you want to review the presentation before your board meeting." "Of course," Anthony agreed. As they walked toward the exit, he took one last look at the bustling terminal, at all the people from different walks of life, moving through the same space with their own destinations, their own stories. In his 20 years in the airline industry, from his first job handling baggage to his current position as CEO, Anthony had seen the best and worst of humanity. Today had shown him both, but as always he chose to focus on the possibility of growth, of change, even in someone like Ms. Patterson. After all, Transformation was what his new vision for Skyway was all about. Anthony's sleek company car glided through midday traffic, the driver navigating with practiced ease between lanes. Inside, Anthony reviewed presentation slides on his tablet while Lisa briefed him on last-minute changes to the board meeting agenda. The sustainability report is scheduled first, followed by the quarterly financials, Lisa explained. The board seems particularly interested in how the new fuel efficiency measures will affect the bottom line. Anthony nodded, making a note. Have the projected savings been updated with the latest fuel cost data? Yes, sir. Finance sent the revised numbers this morning. As they approached the downtown skyline, Anthony's phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at the screen, then did a double take. It was an email from Skyway's Customer Relations Department, forwarded from his assistant. Subject, Formal Apology, Patricia Patterson. Flight 2463. Anthony skimmed the message, raising an eyebrow at its contents. Ms. Patterson had apparently gone straight to a customer service desk after their encounter and dictated a lengthy apology, insisting it be sent directly to the CEO's office. Interesting, he murmured. Lisa looked up from her tablet. Something important, sir? Just following up on an in-flight situation. He set his phone aside, turning his attention back to the presentation. The apology would require consideration, but later. Right now, his focus needed to be on the board meeting. The car pulled up to Skyway's headquarters, a modern glass tower with the company's distinctive blue and silver logo emblazoned across its upper floors. As they entered the lobby, employees nodded respectfully, some looking surprised to see the CEO walking through rather than using the executive elevator. Mr. Reynolds, called a deep voice from across the lobby. Anthony turned to see David Chen, the chief financial officer, striding toward them. Got a minute before the board meeting? Of course, David, walk with me. As they headed toward the elevators, David lowered his voice. I've been looking at the numbers for the sustainability initiative. The upfront costs are higher than we initially projected. Anthony nodded, unsurprised. But the long-term savings? Still substantial, David confirmed. Break even in 3 years instead of 2. But some board members might push back on the timeline. Then we'll need to emphasize the competitive advantage, Anthony replied as they stepped into the elevator. Our passengers care about this. Our latest survey shows environmental impact is a top 5 concern among frequent flyers. The elevator ascended smoothly to the top floor. As they stepped out, Anthony's executive assistant, Ramon, was waiting with a fresh cup of coffee, black with a hint of cinnamon, just how Anthony preferred it. Board members are already arriving, Ramon informed him. And your wife called. She wanted to remind you about dinner with her parents tonight. Thanks, Ramon. Can you pull the customer feedback data on our eco initiatives? We may need it during the presentation. As Ramon hurried off, Lisa handed Anthony a folder with last-minute briefing notes. I'll be in the back of the room if you need anything else, she said. Anthony took a moment alone in his office, setting down his coffee and looking out at the city spread below. In moments like these, he still sometimes felt the surreal nature of his journey, from the son of a mechanic to the CEO of one of the country's largest airlines. His father had fixed planes. Now Anthony ran the company that flew them. A soft knock on his door brought him back to the present. They're ready for you, sir, Ramon said. The boardroom was impressive, a long table of polished walnut surrounded by high-backed leather chairs, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. 8 board members were already seated, engaged in quiet conversation that hushed as Anthony entered. Good afternoon, everyone, he greeted them, moving to his place at the head of the table. Eliza Woodward, the board chairwoman, nodded her welcome. Anthony, we were just discussing your ambitious sustainability plans. The way she emphasized ambitious suggested the discussion hadn't been entirely positive. Anthony had expected this. Several board members had made fortunes in more traditional business models where environmental concerns were secondary at best. Ambitious, yes, Anthony agreed, setting up his presentation, but also necessary, both for the planet and for our future profitability. For the next hour, Anthony walked the board through detailed plans for reducing Skyway's carbon footprint, from fleet modernization to innovative routing algorithms that would reduce fuel usage. He presented the costs alongside projected savings and customer satisfaction data. Throughout his presentation, Anthony noticed one board member, Victor Harrington, looking increasingly skeptical. Harrington was old school, having served on the board for nearly 20 years. When the Q&A portion began, he was the first to speak up. "These are admirable goals, Anthony," Harrington said, leaning forward. "But let's be realistic. Our shareholders care about dividends, not polar bears." There were a few uncomfortable chuckles around the table. Anthony met Harrington's gaze steadily. "With respect, Victor, that's an outdated view. Our shareholders increasingly care about both. The data shows sustainable companies outperform their peers over time." Harrington waved dismissively. "Trendy statistics. I've seen these environmental fads come and go." Anthony pulled up a new slide, one showing customer survey results by age demographic. "This isn't a fad. Look at our under 40 passengers. 83% say they consider environmental impact when choosing airlines. That number has increased every year for a decade." The discussion continued, with other board members joining in. Some supported Anthony's vision. Others expressed concerns about costs. Throughout, Anthony remained composed, answering questions with data rather than emotion. As the meeting wound down, Chairwoman Woodward called for a preliminary vote on funding the first phase of the initiative. 7 hands went up in support. Anthony had his majority, though Harrington and one other member still looked unconvinced. "Thank you for your confidence," Anthony said sincerely. "This isn't just about doing the right thing, though that matters. It's about positioning Skyway for the future." As the board members gathered their things to leave, Harrington approached Anthony. "You presented well today," he admitted grudgingly. "Your father would be proud." The comment caught Anthony off guard. Harrington had known his father, had been on the board when Michael Reynolds worked as a senior mechanic for Skyway. "Thank you, Victor." "That means a lot." Harrington nodded. "Just don't forget where you came from, son. Not everyone gets the opportunities you've had." "I never forget," Anthony replied quietly. "That's partly why this initiative matters to me. It's about creating a sustainable company that can provide opportunities for everyone who works here." After the board members departed, Anthony returned to his office where Ramon was waiting with several messages. "Your 3 o'clock with marketing was pushed to tomorrow. Also, HR sent up the diversity report you requested and—" Ramon hesitated. "And?" Anthony prompted. "And there's someone waiting to see you. A Ms. Patterson? She doesn't have an appointment, but she's been in the lobby for over an hour. Security was about to escort her out when she mentioned she met you on today's flight." Anthony paused, surprised. "Patricia Patterson? The real estate agent?" Ramon nodded, checking his tablet. "She said it's important and personal. I can have security remove her if you'd prefer." Anthony considered this unexpected development. He had assumed the email apology would be the end of it, a perfunctory attempt to protect her reputation rather than a genuine recognition of her behavior. "No," he decided. "I'll see her. Give me 15 minutes to review these reports, then send her up." Alone in his office, Anthony flipped through the diversity report, a quarterly assessment of Skyway's hiring and promotion practices. The numbers showed improvement, but not enough. The airline industry remained predominantly white and male, especially in leadership positions. Anthony had been pushing to change that since taking over as CEO 6 months ago. But institutional change came slowly. His thoughts drifted back to Ms. Patterson and their uncomfortable flight. Her behavior wasn't unusual. He'd experienced similar treatment throughout his career. What was unusual was her apparent desire to follow up in person. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Sir?" Ramon said, opening the door slightly. "Ms. Patterson is here." Anthony took a deep breath. "Send her in." Ms. Patterson looked markedly different from the confident woman who had boarded the plane that morning. Her perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, her expression anxious. She clutched her designer handbag like a shield. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, her voice unsteady. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." Anthony gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit down. I admit I'm surprised to see you here." She perched on the edge of the seat, visibly uncomfortable. "I felt I needed to apologize in person. What I did on that flight, how I treated you. It was inexcusable." Anthony studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. "May I ask what prompted this visit?" "Most people in your position would simply try to forget the incident happened." Ms. Patterson looked down at her hands, After I left you in the terminal, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about how I might treat others when no one important is watching. She paused, swallowing hard. The truth is, you're right, and it's not who I want to be. Anthony leaned back in his chair. Outside his window, planes took off and landed in the distance. Metal tubes carrying hundreds of people of all backgrounds to their destinations. People who deserved dignity regardless of their titles or appearances. I appreciate your honesty, Miss Patterson. It takes courage to acknowledge our mistakes. She looked up, her eyes glistening. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that your words had an impact. You could have reported me, had me banned from the airline. Instead, you gave me something to think about. And I have been thinking hard. The sincerity in her voice seemed genuine. Anthony had seen plenty of insincere apologies in his career. People going through the motions to protect themselves. This felt different. What will you do now? He asked simply. Ms. Patterson straightened slightly. I'm going to start by being more aware of my assumptions and biases, and she hesitated. I've also signed up for a diversity awareness program that my company offers, but I've always avoided. Anthony leaned forward, genuinely surprised by Ms. Patterson's commitment. That's a meaningful step, he said. Most people find it easier to deny there's a problem than to work on themselves. Ms. Patterson nodded, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. I've always prided myself on being, well, a good person. Today forced me to confront the fact that my actions don't always match how I see myself. That's a realization many never reach, Anthony replied. He glanced at his watch. His next meeting would start soon, but something told him this conversation mattered more than he had initially thought. Ms. Patterson, can I ask you something? Of course, she said, straightening slightly. What was your first thought when you saw me sitting in first class? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly struggling with how to answer honestly without further embarrassing herself. Please, Anthony encouraged. I'm not asking to make you uncomfortable. I genuinely want to understand. Ms. Patterson took a deep breath. I thought you didn't belong there, she admitted quietly. I assumed you had somehow ended up in the wrong seat or maybe got a free upgrade, but weren't a real first-class passenger. She couldn't meet his eyes as she continued. I never considered you might be more successful than me. That's the truth, as shameful as it is to admit. Anthony nodded, appreciating her candor. And if I had been a flight attendant or a teacher or a doctor instead of a CEO, would that have made my presence in first class more or less acceptable to you? She considered this for a moment. I'd like to say it wouldn't matter, but after today, I honestly don't know. And that bothers me. There was an authenticity to her discomfort that Anthony found promising. Real growth often began with uncomfortable realizations. Thank you for your honesty, he said. Many people in your position would have sent that email apology and considered the matter closed. I almost did exactly that, Ms. Patterson confessed. But then I remembered how you looked at me in the terminal. Not with anger, but with this hope, I guess. Like you thought I might be capable of better. It's been a long time since anyone expected more from me than just my sales numbers. Anthony's phone buzzed with a reminder about his next meeting. He silenced it without looking away from Ms. Patterson. We all have blind spots, he said. The question is what we do once they're pointed out to us. Ms. Patterson nodded, then reached into her handbag and pulled out a business card. This might sound strange, but I'd like to invite you to speak at our company's leadership retreat next month. We're a large firm with hundreds of agents, and most of our management team looks, well, like me. She placed the card on his desk. Your perspective could be valuable, especially given your success in changing corporate culture. Anthony picked up the card, genuinely surprised by the invitation. That's not what I expected when you walked in here. Me neither, she admitted with a small laugh. But I've been sitting in your lobby for over an hour, thinking about how to make something good come from my terrible behavior. This was the best I could come up with. Anthony tucked the card into his jacket pocket. I'll consider it, he said, not making a firm commitment but leaving the door open. Ms. Patterson stood, sensing the meeting was coming to a close. Thank you for seeing me. Most people wouldn't have given me the chance. Most people haven't walked the path I have, Anthony replied, rising from his chair. Sometimes the most important conversations are with those who don't initially understand our experience. As he showed her to the door, Ms. Patterson paused. Can I ask you something that's been bothering me? Go ahead. How do you do it? Stay so, composed when people treat you unfairly. I lost my temper last week when a barista got my coffee order wrong, but you handled my behavior with such dignity. Anthony considered her question carefully. It's not that I don't feel anger or hurt, he explained. I've just learned that reacting from those emotions rarely creates positive change. My father taught me to ask myself, will my response make this situation better or worse for the next person who looks like me? Ms. Patterson absorbed his words. That's a powerful way to think about it. Thank you. She extended her hand. I won't take up any more of your time. Anthony shook her hand firmly. Safe travels, Ms. Patterson. After she left, Anthony remained standing by the door for a moment, reflecting on their conversation. His phone buzzed again, Ramon reminding him of his delayed meeting with the marketing team. Send them in, he told his assistant as he returned to his desk. 3 months later, Anthony stood before a crowded hotel ballroom, concluding his presentation to the annual National Aviation Conference. His speech on inclusive leadership and Skyway's sustainability initiatives had been well received, drawing enthusiastic applause from industry peers. As attendees mingled during the reception afterward, Anthony found himself surrounded by fellow executives eager to discuss his ideas. He noticed a familiar face approaching from across the room, Ms. Patterson looking professional in a tailored suit. Mr. Reynolds, she greeted him with a smile that reached her eyes. Your speech was excellent, thank you. I'm surprised to see you here. I'm representing my firm. We handle commercial real estate for several airlines, including yours, apparently. Small world. Anthony nodded, noticing something different about her demeanor, a more genuine quality that hadn't been there during their first meeting. How have you been? He asked. Good. Busy with work, but also... She hesitated. I've been doing that diversity program I mentioned. It's been eye-opening. In what way? Ms. Patterson glanced around the predominantly white male gathering. I'm seeing what I didn't see before. Like right now, I counted only 11 women and 7 people of color among the 60-plus executives here. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have noticed or thought it mattered. Anthony nodded appreciatively. Awareness is the first step. It's also been humbling, she continued. Last week, I caught myself making the same kind of assumptions about a young Hispanic agent in our office that I made about you on the plane. The difference was this time I recognized what I was doing. And, Anthony prompted, and I corrected myself. Turns out he's our top performer in the Southwest region. She shook her head. I wonder how many talented people I've overlooked because of my biases. Anthony was about to respond when David Chen, his CFO, approached with a group of investors in tow. Anthony, these gentlemen are very interested in hearing more about our fuel efficiency program, David explained. Of course. Ms. Patterson, if you'll excuse me. Actually, she said, before you go, I wanted to invite you again to speak at our company retreat. After your presentation today, my boss is even more interested. Anthony considered for a moment. Send the details to my office. I think I can make it work this time. As he turned to leave with David and the investors, Ms. Patterson called after him. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for everything. Anthony gave her a small nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention to the investors. As he led them toward a quieter corner of the room, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with that uncomfortable flight 3 months ago. Later that evening, Anthony sat alone in his hotel room, finishing his presentation for the next day's panel discussion. His phone rang, his wife checking in from home. How was the conference? She asked. Interesting, he replied. Remember that woman from the flight I told you about? The one who was so rude to you? What about her? Anthony smiled to himself. I think she might actually be changing. Really? His wife sounded skeptical. People like that rarely do. I used to think so too, Anthony admitted. But sometimes when someone is confronted with the reality of their behavior and given the chance to do better, they surprise you. After ending the call, Anthony walked to the window of his hotel room, looking out at the city lights below. Throughout his career, he had faced countless Ms. Pattersons, people who judged him by his appearance rather than his abilities. Most never had the opportunity or inclination to reconsider their biases. His thoughts drifted to the diversity report sitting on his desk back at Skyway headquarters. The numbers were improving, but there was still much work to do. Creating lasting change meant not just addressing individual biases, but transforming entire systems. Tomorrow, he would stand before industry leaders and challenge them to do better, to create airlines where every employee and passenger was treated with dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. Some would listen, others wouldn't. But Anthony would continue doing the work, one conversation at a time. He returned to his laptop, adding a new slide to his presentation. It featured a quote his father had often repeated, words that had guided Anthony throughout his life. True change happens when we have the courage to see others and ourselves as we truly are, not as we assume. Anthony smiled, thinking of how his father would have reacted to Ms. Patterson's transformation. Michael Reynolds had always believed in people's capacity to grow, even when evidence suggested otherwise. Maybe, Anthony thought as he closed his laptop. His father had been right all along. In an industry constantly in motion, with planes connecting people across continents and cultures, perhaps the most important journeys were the ones that happened within,